Cuba's electoral authorities announced the approval of the new family codes after Sunday's referendum. In Brazil, a massive event called Rio Embraces Lula was held in support of the former president 1 week ahead of the elections. Ukrainian electoral authorities indicated that the turnout in the referendums to join the Russian Federation exceeded the binding quorum in 3 of the 4 regions. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. On Monday, Cuba's electoral authorities announced the approval of the new Families Code after Sunday's referendum. According to Alina Balseiro, the Secretary General of Cuba's National Electoral Council, 6,251,000 voters went to the polls, with 94% of the ballots accounting as valid votes. Balseiro reported that 66.87% of votes were favorable to the yes option, and 33.13% said no, showing an irreversible trend towards the yes option, and therefore granting approval to the new bill on the family code. Balseiro also highlighted Cuban people's discipline during voting day. And during the polling day, Cuban citizens highlighted the importance of the new family code for the well-being of the future generations.
It is a code for the future above all. This is not a code for us. Today we are only going to have the enormous challenge of approving it and starting the steps of its implementations. This is going to be a code that will be fully enjoyed by the next generations, so that we already see the real transformation in our society that this new code of families will imply. So it will be a code for me and for my family, for the little ones at home, for those children who today are still children and don't vote, because it's the legacy that we are going to leave them. A family code that protects them, that transforms them, and that will contribute significantly to their full development as persons in a free country.
For me, it is very important because they are giving us the possibility of being part of the future of this country. We are giving the possibility to future generations to live in a Cuba with more rights, with more inclusiveness, and that is very important.
And now let us review the contents and purposes of the new family code.
September the 25th, the people of Cuba will decide whether to adopt a new family code designed to increase civil rights within the framework of the social transformation of recent years in Cuba and the world. The text, composed of 11 titles and 474 articles, establishes solidarity and affection as the pillars on which family relationships are based, and conceives the family as a union of people linked by affective, sentimental, and psychological ties without distinction of gender. The proposal emphasizes special support for women as the caretakers in most families and provider for the economic value of work in homes, as well as economic protection for those who work as housekeepers and caretakers. 4 types of filiation are contemplated in the code: natural procreation, adoption, assisted reproduction techniques, and bonds resulting from social affectivity, a concept that recognizes and regulates multiparentality both in birth and at later stage. It also mandates the creation of institutions to manage sanctions for domestic violence against vulnerable persons and extends rights to sexual diversities. Among the main detractors of the initiative are the religious sectors, especially the Conference of Catholic Bishops of Cuba, which consider that the text introduces gender ideology in the legislation and deforms the natural basis of the family. The debate on equal marriage in Cuba was also on the table during the drafting of the 2019 Constitution. At the same time, its approval was not possible due to the intense rejection of the Christian churches, among other social sectors.
And Monday is the last day of United Nations high-level general debate of the 77th session of its General Assembly. This is the first entirely in-person General Assembly meeting since the start of the pandemic. Heads of state, heads of government, and top diplomats have addressed global conflicts, the economic fallout after COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and the social inequities that minorities still face worldwide. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. In Brazil, 1 week before the elections, citizens expressed their support for presidential candidate Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva with a massive event called Rio Embraces Lula. The event took place at the Portela Samba School in the city of Rio de Janeiro with a large turnout. The leader of the Brazil of Hope coalition, accompanied by the main representatives of his movement, reiterated his willingness to work for the most needy and compared his administration at the head of the country to that of the current president, highlighting the deficiencies of the Bolsonaro's administration in the economic issue and the social protection policies. Brazil's Carnival takes place in February, but on this last weekend before the presidential elections, relevers came out to the streets to show their support to their favorite candidates. From Olinda, our correspondent Brian Mier has more.
Across Brazil, people are enjoying the last Sunday before this year's elections, when many people will travel back to their hometowns to vote for president, vice president, and members of Congress. In the northeastern city of Olinda, a traditional carnival group associated with the landless workers movement brought thousands out to the streets.
Eu Acho É Pouco is an Olinda carnival group that always takes a political position and is not going to stop doing that at a moment like this. Our lives will be better with Lula.
Putting a social movement carnival group on the streets during election season is a political act, an extension of the canvassing that activists have been doing for the last month on the streets, in the schools and factories, to guarantee that the Brazilian far-right loses control of the presidency and Congress.
We are here today campaigning for the MST's first candidate in a carnival parade that is a historic field of a battle for the Brazilian people. It's important for us to be here occupying the streets so that we can elect our president and remove the genocidal one who is in office right now.
In a climate of rising political violence, a simple act of coming out to the streets to sing and dance and to wear the party colors sends a signal to the far right that Lula's supporters refuse to be intimidated.
Olinda's Carnival is always a very political act. We are out here today to show our choice, which is for Lula and another Brazil.
Brian Mier, TeleSUR, Olinda.
Now we move on to other topics. Tropical storm Ian became a hurricane on Monday and is expected to strengthen further rapidly. Forecasters warned of significant wind and storm surge impacts over western Cuba. At 5 a.m. Eastern Time, the center of Hurricane Ian was located near latitude 18.2 north, longitude 82.0 west. Ian is moving towards the northwest near 14 miles per hour, 22 kilometers per hour. A turn toward the north-northwest is expected today. On the forecast track, the center of Ian is expected to pass near or west of the Cayman Islands today and near or over western Cuba tonight and early Tuesday. Ian will then emerge over the southern Gulf of Mexico on Tuesday and pass west of the Florida Keys late on Tuesday and approach the west coast of Florida on Wednesday. In El Salvador, environmental organizations denounced the contamination of Lake Suchitlan. The Salvadoran lake of more than 13,000 hectares, which also serves as a reservoir for hydroelectric plant and is considered of great international importance by UNESCO, is in a critical situation, according to environmental organizations. They denounce the blanket of plastic, including bottles, containers, and all kinds of plastic materials, in spite of the fact that workers of the hydroelectric plant, as well as residents of the vicinity, constantly collaborate to remove this material from the waters of the lake. The Salvadoran Minister of the Environment, Fernando Lopez, assured that every day in the country, 4,200 tons of waste go to the lake. Super Typhoon Noru slammed into the Philippines on Sunday, battering the heavily populated main island of Luzon with strong winds and heavy rain that have forced thousands of people to flee their homes. The storm was packing maximum sustained winds of 195 kilometers an hour and is charged towards the archipelago nation. Noru, the strongest storm to hit the Philippines this year, hit about 100 kilometers northeast of Manila. Emergency personnel braced for this possibility of strong winds and heavy rains battering the capital. Forced evacuations were underway in some high-risk areas of the metropolis, including impoverished communities living in flimsy shacks along rivers.
We had to do preemptive evacuation because we estimate that the storm will arrive when people are sleeping, and we don't want a repeat of what happened during Typhoon Kixana and the southwest monsoon when people were cut off guard and they couldn't evacuate. That's difficult because people may lose lives.
I evacuated the house that I'm living in because I'm scared. The floods there get really high. I don't want a repeat of what happened to me before.
And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. In Ukraine, in the framework of the referendum on joining Russia, data indicate that the turnout exceeded the number required to consider a binding turnout in 3 of the 4 regions involved in the elections. According to date, electoral authorities counted a turnout of 77.12% in Donetsk, 76.9% in Lugansk, and 51.55% in Zaporizhia, surpassing the 50% required to consider the elections as binding. While in the region of Kherson, a 49.91% turnout was registered during the first 72 hours of the process that will last until next September 27th. The referendum is taking place in the midst of the aggressions of the Ukrainian forces against populated centers, which intensified after the beginning of the voting. And the center-right coalition led the early elections to the Italian parliament by obtaining 44.06% of the votes, according to the first data from the Italian Ministry of the Interior, after counting 10% of the ballots. Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy party won 26.27% of support in the Senate elections, showing the best result of the individual political forces. Their allies, Matteo Salvini's Lega and former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia parties obtained 9.13% and 7.66% of the votes, respectively. Interior Minister Luciana Lamorghese reported voter turnout was 63.8%. down 9% from 2018. Voters elected 400 deputies and 200 senators, fewer than in the previous elections. On Sunday, the governments of Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan reached an agreement to end their border disputes and return to a normal situation. In Kyrgyzstan, authorities expressed their hope in the fulfillment of the agreement reached between the two nations. They also confirmed that those evacuated after the recent clashes between the two countries on the border can return to their homes. In addition, they also assured that the parties will withdraw military personnel from up to 8 posts in the zone of the conflict. The clashes between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan started in mid-September and have resulted in over 100 dead and almost 230 wounded among civilians and military personnel of both sides. Nepal authorities consider trade with Russia in local currencies. The ambassador of Nepal to Russia, Milan Raj Tuladhar, stated that Moscow and Nepal could establish a bilateral mechanism of settlements in national currencies, similar to the one between Russia and India, which allows exchanges between the Russian ruble and the Indian rupee. He assured that the problems in the transactions between the two countries could be solved with the appropriate banking services. In that sense, he stated that to achieve this goal, the central banks of Russia and Nepal should work together. The government in Moscow has repeatedly called on other nations to create a new world financial system in which exchanges will be made with regional currencies. In Sao Tome and Principe, regional elections were held to elect the 55 members of the National Assembly and the mayors of 6 of the country's municipalities. Voted in the African country is disputed among 11 political parties, of which the Prime Minister Jorge Bom Jesus heads the current government, together with 3 political parties: the Democratic Government Party, the PZD, the Union for Democracy and Development, the UDD, and the Democratic Movement for Change, the MDFM. The election was held on Sunday and counted with the participation of more than 14,000 citizens. Electoral authorities assured that the election was monitored by 100 international observers. In turn, they emphasized that the archipelago is considered a model of parliamentary democracy in the continent. Top Egyptian and Sudanese authorities discussed in Cairo the situation regarding the filling and the operation of the Grand Renaissance Dam, built by Ethiopia on the Nile River. A statement from the Egyptian presidency detailed that the issue was discussed during a meeting between President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and the head of the Sudanese Sovereign Transitional Council, Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. The two countries' tensions with Ethiopia escalated over the past year following Addis Abeba's decision to begin filling and operating the dam, which both Cairo and Khartoum consider a danger to their water reserves. In response, Egypt and Sudan are seeking to sign a binding agreement on the management of the dam, which is rejected by Ethiopia. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. And you can also follow us on our TikTok account at TeleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates, and more. For TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.